Well, it's remarkable how everything dovetails at this meeting. Now, Jerry was telling you about an immunization. A few years ago, I was doing a series of talk shows in Jacksonville, Florida, and there was an attorney there who was sort of a wealthy dilettante who had his own talk show. And because I was doing talk shows there, he lit out after me, and every day he started broadcasting. He said, Eustace Mullins is murdering children. Eustace Mullins is advising parents not to vaccinate those children, and those children are going to die horrible deaths. Eustace Mullins is the worst murderer of children that has ever come to Florida. And he would go on and on and on. So I thought, he's probably trying to provoke me into suing him, you know. But so I did tape record some of this, but I never bothered to sue him because I figured that, of course, he was an attorney, so it wouldn't cost him anything, and I represent myself, so it wouldn't cost me anything, but I would have to go to Florida every time we had a court hearing, and it just wasn't practical. But that's one of the few times that I did not sue when I had more than adequate provocation. But it's sort of strange to sit in front of a radio and hear somebody saying, Eustace Mullins is a murderer of children, you know, because I really didn't deserve it. But it was my book, Murder by Ejection, was what provoked this. And it was selling very well down there at that time. So I'm going to talk to you today about the most important thing, which is how to survive in courts. Now, when I published my book, Rape of Justice, in the promotion, I said, most crimes are committed in our courts. Now, I said that 15 years ago, and I'm still waiting for anybody in the legal profession to answer it, because that is a very bold statement. No answer whatsoever. But being in court is quite exciting because those are our modern arenas. It's a jousting tournament. You go in there and they try to kill you, and you try to kill them. It's a war to the death. They call it the adversary system for that very reason, because you go in there to do all the damage to your opponent that you can, and you don't have to worry about morals or scruples because anything goes in court. You may have honor and integrity anywhere else, but you never have it in the court system. And that's because the court system is the total corruption of every human attribute that you could imagine. Now, my first advice to people is always, never be a defendant. Always be a plaintiff. I've always been a plaintiff. In fact, I have sued the U.S. government for so many times that the government has never once, despite a lot of provocation on my part, government has never once filed any legal action against me in the 50 years that I've been active, because I'm in there fighting them first. And when you attack them, the bureaucrats are so timid. I can't even get them to come into court to face me. So I pretty much had my way with them. But so being in court can be a very exciting thing. I used to tour with a guy named George Gordon, who had what he called the Barrister's School of Law, in which he actually trained people how to defend themselves against false charges and so forth. And George would always tell his audience, he would say, if you're in court and you're not having fun, you shouldn't be there. Because it's a lot of fun to go in and defend yourself. You're defending your own interests. And usually you're defending yourself against unjust attacks. So it's very satisfactory to do this. And I always tell people, go to a big prison and stand at the balcony and look down at those rows of cell doors, and behind every one of those iron doors is a prisoner. And just remember, every one of those prisoners had a lawyer. So you see how important lawyers are. And of course, you know, I do a lot of legal consultation, and first advice I always give people who have a legal problem, I say, fire your lawyer. Because the lawyer is not going to do you any good. A lawyer is a businessman who is an entrepreneur who's in business for himself. Whatever a lawyer is going to do is for his advantage, not for yours. because you're a client who's going to come and go. You'll be gone after your case is over. But he's always looking out for himself. And the whole legal profession is a fraternity in which they look out for each other. They protect each other, and the public is their victims. They look upon all the public as a sheep to be shorn. And Jerry was telling you about Freemasonry and so forth. Well, the courts are absolutely the headquarters of Freemasonry. Every judge and every lawyer is a Freemason. So when you go into a court, you're going into a chapter of a Freemasonic lodge. You're in the lodge. And if you're not a member, well, you're just out of luck. And of course, most people, there are people who are Masons that go to court. And in fact, when they come into court, when they walk through the door and toward the podium, they throw their hands up like this. This is the Masonic sign of distress. So this is a Mason coming to court and letting them know that here's a Mason and they sure better help him, you know. That's just one of the little things that you... I acquired a Masonic ring once at an auction, and then I went into court and I walked right up to the judge and judge's podium, and I had my big Masonic ring, and I put it out right in front of him. But I was so dumb, I didn't realize that in a small town, they all know who the Masons are, and they knew damn well I wasn't a Mason. So it didn't do me any good at all. But whenever I start to be clever, it always backfires because the other people are more entrenched and they know what they're doing, and I'm just an outsider looking in from the outside. But the legal profession has a great defense against people like me who represent themselves. They say, a person who represents himself in court has a fool for a lawyer. Well, I've been in the courts for 50 years, and I've had more court time than most practicing lawyers. And from my own experience, I can tell you that I have modernized that statement very simply, and I say that anyone who hires a lawyer is a fool. Whatever a lawyer can do for you, you can do better for yourself, believe me. And the legal system is not that complicated. They try to make it very, very arcane. And of course, it's a Babylonian system. What we have goes back 5,000 years. And of course, Freemasonry originated in Babylon too. So you're dealing with the same entity. And we have achieved a system of justice in the United States, and I'm sure here in Canada also, from Ernst Zundel and his tribulations and many other people. It's a system in which justice has slowly been totally driven out of the courts. One of the most famous lawyers in the U.S. is Jerry Spence. He's been on television a lot, and he's not too far from here in Jackson, Wyoming. And he has a big law building there. The biggest building in Jackson, Wyoming occupies an entire block of downtown Jackson, Wyoming. And Jerry Spence wrote a book a few years ago called Justice for None. And the first line of that is, there is no justice for anyone in an American court. And it's absolutely true. There is no justice. So why would you go? Well, you go there to do combat with your enemies. You don't go there for justice. If you're looking for justice, you're wasting your time. What you do is you go in and fight them, and either they beat you or you beat them. And you have a damn good chance of beating them if you're not intimidated by the system. And I have one other tried and true slogan, and that is, never be a defendant, always be a plaintiff. And I've always been a plaintiff, and I have very seldom been sued in my life, because if you are ready and willing to go to court, people are not going to sue you. They don't want to sue you. Also, I sue lawyers, and lawyers don't like to be sued. There are many areas in the United States where you cannot find anyone, any lawyer, who will sue another lawyer. Called professional courtesy, you know, the feeding sharks and all that. And they will not, I don't care how much money you offer them, they will not sue another lawyer. So I have, as I say, I've sued lawyers who have attacked me and who've tried to injure me. I don't go around looking for a lawyer to sue, but I had one lawyer. There was a side benefit which I didn't know about for years from suing lawyers, and I had a lawyer who teamed up with a relative to try to steal a lot of money from me. And so I sued the relative and the lawyer together. And so it dragged on for a couple of years. And that's another important thing about lawsuits is give yourself a liberal time frame. Don't expect anything's going to be over in 6 weeks. It may be 2 years or 3 years or 10 years. But just stay with it and you'll get there. Because the whole idea of the legal system is to discourage you, to impoverish you, and to force you out of court by simple attribution that you have nothing left and you say, well, I can't go back to court, I haven't got a dime left, so I'm finished. And so by continuing to fight, and of course when you're your own lawyer, the only expense you have is the filing fee. You do have to pay that. And of course a lot of the prisoners who file most of the suits in the states, prisoners sign a vow of poverty, and they don't have to even pay the filing fee. So they flood the courts with lawsuits, which is wonderful because the more lawsuits, the better. Because the whole system is absolutely ridiculous anyway, and the more suits that bog it down, the better it is. So I always file suits without even a second thought. I say, I got to sue that guy. And so I type up the complaint very quickly and take it right down and pay the filing fee, and I'm in business. I have launched my new ship, you know, and it can stay afloat a very long time. Of course, my advantage too in law is that I've been a professional writer and researcher for many years, and that's all law is writing and research. There's very little argument in law. In fact, in England, you know, they have a separate lawyer for a barrister and a separate lawyer to argue in court. So what it means is you pay 2 lawyers instead of 1. But in the States, your lawyer also argues your case in court. It's a one-shot deal. But they do very little court appearances because a lot of it is settled out of court, and they have the legal system where they head you off before you ever get to court. You always ask for a jury trial, but you very seldom get one because it never gets to court. And another very helpful thing to know, and I have trouble getting people to do this. I say if somebody sues you, immediately file a countersuit. And they don't want to do it, and they always have a lawyer, and the lawyer doesn't want to do it because now he's arguing 2 suits for the price of 1. The suit against you and the countersuit. So the lawyer will always say, oh no, we don't want to do that now, we'll do that later. And so there, your best counterattack, your countersuit, your own lawyer denies you that. And they always give a perfectly good explanation. Say, oh, it'll confuse the judge if you bring in a countersuit, and let's get rid of this, let's go through this process, then you can have your countersuit later, which is total nonsense. What you want that countersuit for is you're now counterattacking. Remember, you're at war, and you're attacking the enemy, and the enemy is attacking you, and your countersuit is your counteroffensive. In fact, my slogan as lawyer, I've always said, my strategy is I'm attacking on all fronts. And that's what lawyers do. They attack you on all fronts. They try to destroy you every way that they can. And this Babylonian Freemason system is totally violating of the Constitution. And one of the first things they do is the discovery process. Now, the Constitution of the United States guarantees your right to be secure in your papers and your possessions. The first thing the Babylonian system does is, under discovery, they demand that you bring forth every piece of paper that you have ever acquired in your entire life and turn it over to the opposing lawyer for their inspections. And then they go through this with the fine-tooth comb, and they try to find something they can use against you. In other words, you're required to incriminate yourself, which again is against the Constitution. You're not supposed to have self-incrimination. And the Constitution says you're secure in your papers. No, you have to turn all your papers over to the other side. And this is how the tobacco lawsuit and the Texaco lawsuit in the States, they got these enormous judgments against these companies, $146 billion against the tobacco companies, because they made the tobacco companies turn over all of their private records, and then they went through them and they would take little things out of context and say this is incriminating. And they persuaded the juries, who are very easily persuaded anyway, they don't know anything. the only way you're chosen for jury duty is to make sure that you don't know anything. I have never been asked to do jury duty because I'm too smart. And I'm immune anyway because I am a practicing lawyer, although I just represent myself. And if you're a practicing lawyer, you cannot be called for jury duty. And if I was ever called, I would plead that because I always have cases going on. And you cannot go and sit at jury duty if you're a lawyer and you've got to be in court tomorrow on another case. So it gives you a nice exemption. And because some of these court cases will drag on for a year and you go down there and sit as a jury duty, sometimes you're not even on the jury. You have to be there as an alternate jury. And it takes up a whole year of your time, and it's totally wasteful. But one of the things that judges are most afraid of is contempt. They're afraid you'll be contemptuous of them because of the contemptible things they're doing to you. And there's the old saw that the judge says, "Sir, are you showing your contempt for this court?" And the guy says, "Well, no, Your Honor, I'm trying to hide it." And you do have to say Your Honor. I always say Your Honor, and I do it, and I try to do it without laughing, but it's not always easy. But my legal experiences, I must say, have been the greatest fun of my life, suing lawyers and so forth. And this one lawyer that I sued, the case dragged on for almost 2 years, and we were down on motions day. They have what they call motions day. You go down to the judges' chambers, and the parties argue motions against each other. And so this lawyer came up to me while we were waiting to go into chambers, and he says, "Mr. Mullins," I said, "Yes." He said, "Can't we do something about this lawsuit?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing all I can. You know, I'm not." And then for good measure, I threw in, I said, "Well, you know, I'm not really a lawyer myself, and I'm not sure what I'm doing. So that's why we're not making more progress, see?" And I admitted my guilt. I was the problem in the whole case. He says, "Well, you know," he says, "ever since you filed this case," he said, "my malpractice insurance has doubled, and it's costing me $10,000 a year just to have this case going." And I said, "Gosh, I'm sorry you told me that. That makes me feel so bad." And I was trying not to laugh, but it was one of the best news I ever heard in my life. I didn't realize you had this wonderful side benefit that when you sue a lawyer, you really cost him a lot of money immediately. Starts coming right out of his pocket, and it's just something that you don't expect. Sometimes this little manna from heaven comes down, and you're not even looking for it, but there it is. And in fact, that poor lawyer was so desperate. He finally settled with me. He came to me and he said, "Just draw up an agreement, anything you want, and I'll sign it." So I did. I signed on my own terms. You know, people have said to me over the years, "Well, Eustace, do you ever win a lawsuit?" Well, you win every time you go into court to defend your own interest. You're winning. Every minute that you're in there, it's a winner. So don't ever let anyone persuade you that it's a waste of time to go to court, it's a needless expense. Because believe me, you're fighting for your life and your property. When you go into court, everything's at risk. Every asset that you have, your whole life ahead of you, it's placed at risk because of this diabolical Masonic system that you go into. So you need every protection you can get. Now, there's always the problem of what to call yourself when you defend yourself. For years, we used attorney pro se, and then we used pro propria persona, that is, you in your proper person. But David Miller came up with a new term a couple years ago called citizen in party. A citizen in party having firsthand knowledge of the facts. And I've used that ever since. And it's really helped me in court because I find that the judges are very impressed by this. You're a citizen in party. And I think it throws them a little bit. They're not sure. You know, judges and lawyers are very uncertain of themselves. they never are quite sure what you're up to when you're not a lawyer. Because, see, they're all a fraternity and they work together. And your lawyer and the opponent's lawyer always work together to give you the best screwing you ever had in your life. But when you don't have a lawyer, you take away their greatest advantage. The judge doesn't know what to do with you. The other lawyer doesn't know what to do with you. And they're thinking, gosh, this kook is coming in here and he's messing up our whole system. And it is. It's a beautiful system. It's a system for robbing people. Being a professional lawyer, a member of the bar, means you have a legal license to steal. You have a license to rob everybody that you come in contact with. And believe me, they don't miss the opportunity either. So every time I've gone into court, I've won, and I've won quite a bit. In fact, I have judgments against the FBI today entered in federal court, one for $35 million and one for $50 million. And I haven't collected them because I have so much fun having those judgments, and I renew them every year with the FBI and the IRS just to let them know I'm still around. I got those judgments in '82, and I got them because after many years, I got copies of my FBI file. And I didn't ask for them for many years because I thought, how could I have an FBI file? I've never even had a parking ticket in my life. And my friends would say, Eustace, you must have an FBI file. They must have a lot on you. And so finally, I wrote to them, and they answered, said, yes, you have 800 pages. And that was 500 pages more than John Dillinger, the most famous outlaw in American history. He only had 300 pages. I had 800 pages. Well, of course, I was very interested in this, and so they said to do it for 10 cents a page. So I sent them the money, and then they began to stall, and they wouldn't send it to me. And for about a year, they stalled me. And finally, I wrote to Senator John Warner of Virginia, a classmate of mine in college, and I said, the FBI hasn't sent me my file. And, and 2 days after I wrote to John Warner, I had a knock on my door just at dusk, and there was a guy standing there, and he thrust his package into my hands, and it was my FBI file, and he ran away. I couldn't even tell you what he looked like. It was very furtive, but there I was with my FBI file. Well, I opened it up and started reading it, and it was great reading. I put 120 pages of my FBI file in my book, A Writ for Martyrs, which explains how federal agents harass private citizens. And so a lot of it is marked out with black ink, you know. In fact, I was on a radio show in Dallas, and I showed the interviewer a couple of pages of my FBI file. It was all blacked out and marked. You couldn't see one word on it. And he said, oh, yes. He said, freedom of information. That's what you get when you deal with the FBI. Now, when you go to court, they have to produce the unmarked file. But so, of course, when I sued the FBI, because in my file, I found out in 1959, J. Edgar Hoover had personally ordered me committed to a mental institution. Now, J. Edgar Hoover was not a psychiatrist. He was a guy that needed a psychiatrist, but he wasn't one himself. And he ordered the top 5 assistant directors of the FBI as top priority to see to it that I got committed to a mental institution. Of course, I knew nothing of this at the time. And there was Clyde Tolson and Al Belmont, and the top 5 people under J. Edgar Hoover were all ordered to drop everything else and make sure that they got me into a mental institution. He didn't tell them how because he didn't know how, but they did cook up a scheme finally with the Chicago office where I was living there, that they would bring me before a Cook County judge, and the judge would commit me to a mental institution. Well, Providence is always in there working overtime, and a few weeks before they were going to do this, I took off for Michigan to write the biography of Ezra Pound. A friend gave me a cabin up there, and and of course I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I loaded up my car and drove out of Chicago, and so the FBI had informants all around. In fact, they used to come banging on my door every day, and I wouldn't let them in. And so I never once opened the door for him because I was there by myself. And a team of FBI agents comes in. They could say that I met him with an assault weapon and they had to shoot me down, you know. You have everything to lose and nothing to gain by dealing with these people. So after I went to Michigan, J. Edgar Hoover panicked because he figured that I had been tipped off and that in revenge I would probably come to Washington and kill him. So he issued a national alert for me. They had FBI agents at every bus station, every airport, and train station in the United States. And their only mission was to be sure that if I came in, I was to be apprehended at once. Well, I was traveling by a beat-up old car that I bought for $100, so I had no reason to go to any train station or anything else. And they had not a clue as to where I was because I had never gone to this place in Michigan before. And weeks went by, and they still did not know where I was, and they still had the national alert out for me. And J. Edgar Hoover was still expecting me to come to Washington and shoot him. Although I had no gun at that time, it would have been a little difficult. But they don't take those things into consideration because under J. Edgar Hoover, the whole FBI operated under total fear and paranoia, reflecting his own condition, you know. And so there I am sitting up there in Michigan, typing away on the biography of Ezra Pound. And beautiful, it was summertime like this, beautiful weather on a lake. And so the uncle of the owner of the cabin, he and his wife wanted to go down to Chicago for a weekend and go to a play and nightclubs and so forth. So I said, why don't you go and use my apartment and you can bring my mail back. Because of course I had not forwarded mail or anything. And so they drive up in the alley behind my apartment, and as they got out of the car and went upstairs, I was on the second floor, to go in the back door of my apartment, a number of FBI agents jumped out, shining lights in their face, and they're all screaming, "Where's Mullins?" And the supervisor, they were scared out of their wits, because in Chicago, you don't know whether FBI agents are mafia or what, you know, and just plain robbers. So they said, well, he's up in Michigan at Lake Mecosta. They said, okay, and they disappeared. Well, when they were upstairs, the FBI had grabbed the keys out of their car so that I couldn't drive off. They figured it was me, you know, and that I would be taking off, so they grabbed his keys. And so the guy had no keys to his car. They left because they got what they wanted, but they didn't give him his keys back. So here he is stuck in Chicago on a Saturday night and no keys. And he started calling around. He finally got somebody to come and make a pair of keys. So they were so disgusted, they drove all the way back to Lake Mecosta. And the next day, Russell told me what had happened. So, well, before that, when I was awakened the next morning at dawn by somebody rapping on the door. And I looked at it, and three very well-dressed, they were very senior FBI officials, had flown up there, and there they were knocking on my door. And I said, well, what do you guys want? And they said, can we come in? And I said, well, I wouldn't mind your coming in, but I said, this cabin is lent to me, and it's full of stuff of the owner. And I said, when you come in, you steal things. So these FBI agents were very apologetic. They said, well, will you let us in if we promise not to steal anything? I mean, they're very reasonable people, you know. And so I said no, and I talked to them through the door. And I said, what do you guys want anyway? And they said, well, we just wanted to know about Verna. And I said, well, what about Verna? And they said, Verna was the nurse who nursed J. Edgar Hoover's mother through her last illness. And Verna was not troubled by Edgar's habits at all, but his mother, on her deathbed, called J. Edgar Hoover and said, look, I only want one thing from you, Edgar, and that is, will you promise to give up Clyde? And Edgar said, well, Mother, if that's what you want, I'll do it.